Something was brewing on the stormy shores of Scandinavia in the mid-8th century. The communities living in what is today Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, who called themselves Norse, Danner, and Savor, were becoming more and more crowded with each passing generation. There wasn't enough land to farm. The population was growing. Political authority was fragmented, and every clan leader ruled over his own small world. Add to this a warrior culture that considered dying for honor and glory a virtue. As if these internal pressures weren't enough, a huge void had formed outside. The undisputed ruler of Europe, the Carolingian Empire, had begun to shake, and areas waiting to fill the gap left by the great powers had begun to emerge. For these coastal people, the solution came from the sea. The ships they called longships achieved something few technologies in history have managed. They completely changed the rules of the game. This boat could enter shallow waters, moved by both sail and oar. It was fast, silent, and transitioned effortlessly from river to sea. In short, it was like an indefensible weapon. Within a short time, the plundering raids that began with these ships turned into a way of life. The sea raiders were given the name Vikings. These raids, initially limited to coastlines, turned into a great movement that shaped an entire era once the Vikings dared to venture into open waters. At the top of their target list was the island of Britain. After the withdrawal of Rome, a dozen minor lords and kings ruled their own lands here. Angles, Saxons, Jutes. The Vikings weren't entirely foreign to this island. There was limited trade between them thanks to coastal commerce. But now they saw a different picture. Instead of walled cities, there were undefended monasteries, unguarded riches, and royal courts without armies. The first major symbolic blow came in 793 at Lindisfarne. A small Viking group destroyed this holy monastery, which until then had been considered untouchable. The attack was not an isolated incident. A year later, Jarrow was raided, and in 795, Iona and other monasteries in the Irish Sea became targets. A wave of anxiety spread through the Anglo-Saxon world. But the real storm had not yet come. King Egbert, who ascended the Wessex throne in 802, broke the influence of Mercia, the most powerful force in the region by the mid-820s. By adding Kent, Sussex, Surrey, and Essex to his domain, he became the most powerful ruler on the island for a short time. He recognized the Viking threat early and also carried out defensive struggles. Although he was defeated by the Danes at Carhampton in 836, he crushed the alliance of Danes and Cornish at Hingston Down in 838 and kept his kingdom alive. His son Ethelwulf continued this fight. Meanwhile, Viking raids had spread far beyond Britain. They attacked Scotland and Ireland, establishing permanent bases in Ireland. They battered the Frankish coasts and penetrated inland along rivers. They besieged Paris. They opened up to the Mediterranean and targeted the coasts of Andalusia. They reached the Byzantine and Abbasid worlds via the Volga and Dnieper. They went wherever water could take them. They left fear in every land they visited. Despite this wave of plunder, the Anglo-Saxon kings managed to preserve their existence somehow, until the year 865. That year, the majority of previously independent Viking groups united around a common purpose. Raiding and leaving was no longer enough. They wanted to conquer these lands and settle on them. At the head of the Great Army they formed were the three sons of the semi-legendary Viking warrior Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar, Halfdan, and Ub. These Viking forces, of Danish and Norwegian origin, landed near Thetford in East Anglia in 865. At first, they only asked for logistical support. They spent the winter here without disturbing the kingdom of East Anglia. In 866, they moved. They crossed the River Humber and headed for York. Northumbria had been left defenseless due to a civil war between Osbert and Aella. The city fell quickly. When the threat grew, the two rival kings united their forces and marched on York. Bloody fighting took place in the streets and at the foot of the walls. When the battle was over, only Ivar's men remained standing. Osbert, Aella, and most of Northumbria's nobles lay dead. A kingdom had passed into history. Ivar, establishing his rule, did not hesitate. He set his eyes on richer lands. The Viking army marched on Mercia, targeted Nottingham, and the city fell into enemy hands before King Burgred of Mercia could move to retake it. Recall that Burgred was married to the daughter of King Ethelwulf of Wessex. He asked for help from his brothers-in-law, King Athelred and his younger brother Alfred, who were on the throne at that time. Although their forces besieged Nottingham, time worked against the allies. The Vikings were a professional war machine. They could find supplies and be patient. In contrast, the Saxon army consisted of farmers who had to return to their fields. Ivar waited behind the walls, and eventually Burgred gave in. Peace was made in exchange for heavy tribute. The brothers returned south with heavy hearts. In 868, the Great Army wintered in York. In 869, they moved again, this time targeting East Anglia. King Edmund lacked the strength to resist. Ivar demanded his submission. Edmund refused. The fighting was short. East Anglia fell. Edmund either died in battle or was captured and tortured to death. By 870, the picture was brutally clear. Northumbria had been wiped from the historical stage, East Anglia had collapsed, and Mercia was deeply shaken. At this point, Ivar fell into a major disagreement with the other Viking leaders, withdrew from the southern arena, and crossed to Ireland to continue his raids. But the Viking army did not disband. The threat to the Anglo-Saxons had not ended. Bagsec and Ivar's brother Halfdan took command of the forces in East Anglia. In the autumn, this army entered Berkshire. Their target was Reading. Before the year ended, the city fell. However, 3 days later, the Saxons ambushed and destroyed a Viking unit. Then the Wessex army marched on Reading. This time the Vikings were prepared, and in a fierce battle, the Saxons were routed. Athelred and Alfred only managed to survive thanks to their knowledge of the region's mountain paths and ridges. When the two brothers reached the hills known as Ashdown, they noticed Viking forces approaching from behind. Retreat was no longer possible. They quickly formed battle lines. The date was January 8, 871. It was snowing heavily. The two armies stood facing each other, ready for a life-or-death reckoning. The Vikings deployed their forces in 2 columns with their usual discipline. The front unit contained elite warriors. The second and main force contained Bagsec and Halfdan. The Anglo-Saxons also split into 2 columns. The younger brother Alfred would command the front, while King Athelred would command the main force in the rear. The moment approached when the Vikings would charge up from below the slope. But King Athelred was in his tent, praying and worshiping. Alfred did not wait for his brother. Under pressure from the enemy, he took the initiative and gave the order to advance. According to some historians, this was not impatience. On the contrary, it was a conscious tactic. The king's main forces would later strike the decisive blow. Alfred quickly arranged his soldiers into a shield wall and launched a fierce defense against the Viking front line. Seeing this resistance, Halfdan immediately attacked with his second group. The combat quickly turned into a bloody stalemate. For hours, the two sides fought hand-to-hand around a bare, solitary tree on the ridges of Ashdown. The moment the balance tipped came when one of the Anglo-Saxon soldiers killed Bagsec. A tremor began in the Viking ranks. Despite this, Alfred did not abandon the line until his brother arrived. He continued the defense with determination. And what was expected happened. King Athelred, having finished his prayers, took command of his army and joined the attack at the fiercest moment of the battle. With the king personally entering the battlefield, signs of collapse appeared in the Viking ranks. Halfdan saw things going badly, rallied his army, and tried to retreat. Some managed to take refuge in the fortifications at Wokingham. For those left behind, there was no escape. The Anglo-Saxons mowed down the retreating enemy like crops in the fields. The Battle of Ashdown was a victory won with blood in 871. Halfdan withdrew sullenly to Reading. Reinforcement forces under Guthrum were coming to help via the River Thames. But after a 2-week breather, Halfdan headed for Basing. This was no ordinary village. It was a strategic gateway to river routes in the interior. Losing this point for Wessex meant opening the road to the heart of the kingdom. The King of Wessex immediately marched on the Viking forces. The battle began on January 22nd. This time, The Anglo-Saxons did not get what they wanted and found themselves in a difficult position. Finally, Ethelred and Alfred had to give the order to retreat to prevent the complete destruction of the army. Halfdan had no intention of leaving unfinished business. After a 2-month period of recovery and raising new forces, he once again moved his army, which had worn down Wessex. Unable to gather enough soldiers in the harsh conditions of March, Ethelred had to meet his enemy at Marathon to defend his lands. The balance of power was against Wessex. The combat quickly turned in favor of the Vikings, and the Saxon army suffered a heavy defeat. While Ragnar's son Halfdan celebrated his victory, King Ethelred, believed to have been wounded in battle, died shortly after. The king's death marked the end of an era for the besieged Anglo-Saxons. After Ethelred's death, the Wessex assembly of nobles and warriors swore allegiance to Alfred. They saw him not just as a king, but as the last hope to carry on the struggle, and they begged him to take up the banner of resistance. Crowned in April, Alfred fell into deep thought. Halfdan, with the arrival of spring, was reinforced by a new army from his homeland and moved to finish Wessex for good. He attacked deep into the kingdom. Alfred, not even a month after ascending the throne, had to pursue the Vikings. Halfdan emerged victorious from the battle that took place on a hill near Wilton. Alfred withdrew to the capital, Winchester, and sent a letter to Halfdan stating that he would accept all terms. Everything the court and nobles had was sold and transferred to the Viking treasury. Having received the gold he wanted, Halfdan withdrew to London and began preparations for his next campaign. King Burgred of Mercia, realizing his turn had come, sent chest after chest of gold, but could not avoid disaster. In 873, Halfdan advanced into the heart of Mercia, reached Repton, and sent his raiders in all directions. Burgred, not daring to face the Vikings, fled with his court and retinue to Rome, to the Pope. Halfdan placed a puppet king on the empty throne, and thus Mercia also collapsed. Then turning north, Halfdan advanced with part of his army to the River Tyne. The remaining forces, under Guthrum's command, headed south to Cambridge. Guthrum's target was the only kingdom still standing, Wessex. The Viking threat reappeared in a new guise in late 875. Guthrum bypassed Saxon scouting forces with a night march and seized Wareham. The Vikings had passed almost without a fight into the heart of Wessex. The mobilized FYRD army was not enough to stop this move. Still, Alfred did not give up pursuit. Soon, news that a large Viking fleet had appeared off the south coast completely upended the balance. Alfred sat down at the negotiating table again. According to the agreement reached, Guthrum would leave Wessex in exchange for gold, and the two sides would exchange hostages. This time, the Vikings swore on their own sacred rings instead of Christian holy objects. For the Anglo-Saxons, this was both a shameful and worrying sign. Guthrum did not keep his word and did not leave Wessex. Leaving his fleet at Wareham, he moved to Exeter, aiming to ally with the Celtic Cornish who were hostile to Wessex. What upended his plan was an unforeseen natural disaster. The fleet of 120 ships that set sail from Wareham Harbor was caught in a storm just as it reached open waters and sank into the depths of the English Channel. Alfred, hearing the news, quickly moved and besieged Exeter. Cornered, Guthrum came to terms with Alfred and left Wessex in the summer of 877. The Vikings exiting the fortress reached Gloucestershire, summoned Ceolwulf, the puppet ruler of Mercia, and made an arrangement with him. According to this, the west of Mercia would remain under Ceolwulf's control, while the east would be divided among the Viking chieftains. The Northmen wanted to settle in these lands. Alfred hoped the enemy would pause their attacks for a while, because the situation was extremely dire. Successive defeats had exhausted resources. The tributes paid to the Vikings had worn down the people and the council of nobles. Raising the militia forces was becoming more difficult every day. In late 877, while Alfred was at Chippenham, what he feared happened. Guthrum broke his word, secretly slipped into the king's location, and launched a surprise attack. Alfred and a few close associates barely saved their lives, fleeing deep into the forests. Guthrum thought Alfred had fled across the sea. With Wessex leaderless, the Vikings found unlimited room to maneuver and spread across the land. Instead of fleeing, Alfred quietly and secretly began gathering loyal men around him. In the early months of 878, he emerged and continued the fight with guerrilla tactics. Guthrum sent men to deal with Alfred and also called Ub, who was in Wales, for help. Ub, one of Ragnar's surviving sons, landed in western Wessex with about 1,200 warriors. But in Devon, forces loyal to Alfred were waiting for him in the wooded terrain. In the ensuing battle, the Anglo-Saxons were victorious, and Ub unexpectedly lost his life. This news created a huge wave of enthusiasm among the Anglo-Saxons. People began to gather around their king once more. Alfred knew that the army he had gathered represented his last resources. Such an opportunity might never come again. He emerged from the dark corner where he had been hiding and marched directly on the Vikings. Guthrum gathered his forces to meet him and arrived at Edington. The battle that would decide the fate of the island of Britain would take place here. Would the Vikings defeat the last free Anglo-Saxon king and rule the entire island? Or would Alfred succeed in halting this advance? At Edington, Guthrum awaited Alfred. The advantage was with the Vikings. The heavily armed, battle-hardened Danish warriors formed a tight line. Shields shoulder to shoulder, spears extended forward. Pagan war songs echoed in the wind. Alfred moved his army with a single command. The FYRD held their ground despite fear, because there was nowhere left to retreat. Behind them were only burned and destroyed villages. Ahead was either victory or the end. The initial clash was shocking. The ground of Edington trembled as the shield walls collided. Iron struck iron, shields cracked, spears broke. A mill of death turned for hours. The Vikings were experienced, disciplined, and calculated every step. But Alfred's army was superior in numbers and did not retreat an inch. At one point, something subtle but with deadly consequences occurred. A crack appeared in Guthrum's line. Perhaps it was fatigue, perhaps a drop in morale, perhaps the shadow of Ub's death still haunted the army. Alfred saw this and did not hesitate. The West Saxon line pushed forward. The pressure increased. The Viking shields began to move backward. This was no longer a battle. It was a collapse. By the time Guthrum realized his defeat, it was too late. He gave the order to retreat. Alfred, instead of stopping to celebrate his victory, began a relentless pursuit. The Vikings were cut down as they fled from Edington toward Chippenham. There was no place to hide, no time to catch a breath. On those lands where Alfred had hidden like a ghost for months, he was now the hunter. The battle did not end at the gates of Chippenham. Alfred besieged Guthrum inside. Anyone who came out was killed. Food and livestock were seized. This was no ordinary siege. It was the settling of years of accounts. 2 weeks later, Guthrum surrendered. But this was no ordinary surrender. Alfred did not just bring the pagan war leader to his knees. He dictated his terms. According to the agreement reached between the two leaders, the Vikings would not attack Wessex or demand tribute. The west of Mercia would be ceded to Alfred. Most importantly, Guthrum would accept Christianity, be recognized as king of East Anglia, and establish friendly relations with the Anglo-Saxons, subduing his opponent not by force of arms, but through the waters of baptism. This was a victory unique to Alfred. This great turning point left deep marks on British history. As the last free Anglo-Saxon ruler, Alfred had stopped the Vikings and saved his people from annihilation. He had also established a religious and cultural superiority over the Northmen. This, in the long run, opened the door for the Vikings to integrate into British society. The Wessex throne had proven its power, and the foundations had been laid for the future unification of England. But what truly made Alfred immortal was not only his achievements on the battlefield. This king, who learned to rise after repeated defeats and, following his victory, left a legacy that surpassed his own era through his reforms. Legal system, education network, defensive organization, earned the title Great from history. And he deserved it. This text has been attempted to be brought to life using AI technology. Don't forget to follow us, like, and click the notification bell for more videos. Stay healthy.